It's December 1860. Giuseppe Verdi, 47 years old, is enjoying life in the countryside. He's famous, he's rich thanks to the success of operas like Rigoletto and La Traviata, and he's in a position to turn down work, which he does quite a lot. But then the Imperial Theatre in St. Petersburg offers him a whopping 60,000 francs and all expenses paid to write a new opera, and he can't refuse. He decides on the perfect subject, an epic Spanish play called Don Alvaro, or The Force of Destiny. 2 years later, the opera premieres as one of Verdi's most dramatically intense works, La Forza del Destino. Good evening, I'm Sarah Moore-Peach, and on the 2nd of April in cinemas all across the world, you'll be able to see Christophe Loy's stunning new production live from the main stage here at the Royal Opera House in London. Verdi's opera centres on Leonora, the daughter of a Spanish marquis and the man she's in love with, Don Alvaro. But when her father forbids the marriage and they try to elope, Don Alvaro accidentally shoots her father dead. This triggers a chain of events that spin out across Europe, the lovers separated and pursued by Leonora's brother, Don Carlo, who's bent on revenge. Eventually, the three characters are brought together by fate one last time for a suitably tragic ending. We've just heard some of the glorious music from Verdi's opera in a stunning performance by Aygul Ahmetshina with Edmund Whitehead at the piano. Both of them are members of the Royal Opera House's Jette Parker Young Artist Scheme, and we'll be hearing more about the music later on. But first of all, to find out more about the key characters that make up the Force of Destiny, I'm delighted to say that we're joined this evening by opera's golden couple. Please put your hands together for the soprano Anna Netrebko and the tenor Yusuf Eyvazov. Thank you both so much for joining us this evening. I know you are busily in the middle of rehearsals.
I promise we didn't spoke together before. We're exactly the same color. It's just accident.
Look, we'll talk a bit about the production and what goes into these roles for you. But first of all, could you just explain to us who your characters are? Pretend you're not Anna and Yusuf for a moment, but who is Leonora to start with?
Misfortunate girl. Really very, very tough life from the beginning until the end. It's very, yeah, very sad, very dramatic, very, yeah, the force del destino.
The force of destiny, absolutely. When we meet her, is she in a happy place? Is she happy in love, or is she in the middle of conflict?
Actually, if you will see, when you will see this production, it starts already from overture acting, and you will see a little story of the family from the beginning. And you will see even when she was a little girl, she was already not happy. And when she wanted to leave this family, she wasn't happy too. Even if she was in love with the amazing young man, she wasn't happy because she was not ready to leave her father, whom she loves very much, maybe even more than her future husband. We don't know that. But yeah, she'd been struggling in between two big loves, could not decide what to do, but destiny decided for her, unfortunately.
And Yusuf, from your perspective, tell me about Don Alvaro. He's from a different kind of background, social background and class to Leonora.
His story is not very different from Leonora's story. I mean, he's also unhappy. And in this opera, he has only maybe few first 10 pages of happiness. So then it's coming up everything possible happens to him. He just throws the gun and kills her father by accident. So he doesn't want, and from that begins all his sad story. And in the middle of the opera, he go to the war. He hoped to die because he doesn't want to live anymore. And for 30 years or 25 years, he was thinking that Leonora already passed away. So The story, it's really weird. Oh my God.
Yeah.
If we're going to think about every single page which is written in this opera, we start to cry right now, and we'll stop in the premieres, yes.
But it's a strange love story to have central to an opera in a way, because it's not a love story played
I
out
mean,
on
the love
stage,
story,
right?
it's
It
only
begins
for,
with
for
the
5
potential.
pages.
Yeah.
First
But
5 pages.
then you're
That's it. The love
separated.
story is finished. In start, everything possible. You know, the hell is starting. So that's the question.
So what is it attracts the two characters? This is not off stage I'm talking about, on stage. What is it attracts Leonora and Don Alvaro to one another? Why do they come together in the first place?
We don't know that. It's already happened.
Do you have a sense, though, from the way in which Verdi writes the characters? Does it make sense to you why they come together in the first place?
No. Probably he is everything what she did not have in her life. But it's more her fantasy and imagination. But what she really loves, she loves her father, she loves her brother, she loves her family and her land. That's her experience. And I think for her it's extremely hard to live it with this fantasy of new love, which is very,
Dark.
you know, surreal and not yeah. I think so. I mean, it's more imagination, it's more hope, it's more fantasy than the real love.
And for him?
And they have only one duet in the beginning. So in this opera, the tenor has 3 duets with baritone. 3, not 1, 3. And only one with Leonora. So they meet in the beginning when they love each other, and they meet in the end when they died. So
You just gave the ending away. Look, their characters aside, this is your role debut with Leonora,
Yes.
and I'm interested.
I'm still learning.
Yeah. So how has that been to learn the part? How is she to?
Beautiful. Lots of people told me that it's a very difficult role. So far, I did not find it too demanding. I mean, of course, it's a Verdi. You need to, you need to sing it. You need to sing it beautifully. But it's written very comfortable for the voice. It's never pushes too much. And it has a lots of bel canto. It has a lots of mezza voce, which is very beautiful. And I love it. I love music from the first bar to the last bar when she's dying. Absolutely gorgeous role, and I'm just so impatient to perform it.
And I mean, there are several kind of dramatic soprano rep roles that you've been doing, like Adriana Lecouvreur and Maddalena in Andrea Chenier, and Tosca as well. What is it about that more sort of dramatic, meaty role that started to attract you? I mean, I know over time your voice has become richer and...
You know, as I say, I'm not a dramatic soprano. I'm just soprano. I don't know, whatever. I'm soprano. And I'm singing the roles which I feel I can do. And other ones which I don't feel, and my heart is not there, I'm not singing. So, but those are, I like. And
when your heart is attracted to a role, is it about the vocal role, or is it about the, I suppose, the emotional arc of the role, or the
I
character?
think it has to be both. I
Right.
have to understand the character very well. And, you know, when I was studying Tosca, I did not like her at all. I did not like the character. But I say, okay, I do it because I have to do it. But after that, I started to like it more and more, start to understand this woman. But I think with every character, you need to work a little bit to try to get into that. I mean, Leonora does not have much character. It's more about, it's lots of beautiful monologues, very touching, very tortured, and it's more about a beautiful suffering soul than about the acting like Lady Macbeth, for example. You know, it's completely opposite, completely different. And that's why I like it, to find something else in there, you know.
Joseph, Don Alvaro is a quite a different character to that. He's quite stormy and passionate, and
he's a pure. He's really innocent, I think, you know, somehow.
innocent.
Yeah, because all the things which happens to him, there is no his fault in that. I love him, and really, I'm so sorry for him. I mean, because, and of course, the beautiful pages of his arias on his duets with baritone, which is amazing, and I love that music. And really, I have to say that for
Your
me,
role is difficult.
I mean,
It is.
yeah, there is a couple of I see. But you know, I love to prepare this role with Maestro Tony Pappano because he's really, oh my God, he's building the role, he's building the music in the way which is, I would love to do all the operas with him, you know.
Am I right
That's
that
not
you worked
possible,
with
but
him?
I try.
You worked with him for the first time last year
In Macbeth,
in Macbeth.
yeah. But you know, there is no many things to sing, only one aria. And Macduff doesn't have any space to, and here really, oh my God,
That's a work.
everything.
So what kind of a sort of atmosphere does he create in the rehearsal room, Maestro Pappano, who's going to be joining us, I should say, a bit later on?
Yeah, we know.
He's still busy, very busy downstairs. But yeah, what's the rehearsal room like with him?
Atmosphere, it's, yeah, he loves
Music.
music, he loves singers,
Yes.
which is very
And
important. And he,
This is the most important thing. He loves music and he respects music, and you feel this all the time. The most important thing is the music, and he gives you so much knowledge, so much heart, and to work with him is really a big pleasure. I'm saying honest.
and he knows how to take from you the best of you, even if you don't know that you have it. So you discover the many things which is you can do, and he's so simple to explain that. So he's genius.
And the role that you're singing, have you found, I suppose, other aspects of yourself inside that role as well?
I mean, I'm not that unhappy. Like,
No. But in a way, there is something about that character
I'm
that
in
everyone
love,
can relate
but
to, right?
yeah.
The moment where you do something by accident and you recognise the repercussions of it.
That's a very difficult question. Oh my God. Yeah, but I cannot see Don Alvaro from my perspective. I cannot, because I'm a very happy person. So I'm in love. I'm love it. So I don't know what he can feel. I don't know what the people can feel, which is leave this situation. I don't really, and I hope to never
Experience that.
experience that. But I find, you know, I'm looking for that, for the solution in the music, because the music gives you every solution, and Verdi brought everything. So that's very, and in this huge role, very easy to be boring. So that's the difficult part of my job now, to make all these melodies beautiful, interesting, with the nuances, with the dynamics, so very different. So which is Maestro Pappano doing? Thank you.
And tell me about the rehearsal process, because there are two different casts in this production, and you're actually in different casts.
No,
although
we
you
are all
cross
mixing.
over on one.
Only
We're
one
all
performance.
mixing.
You're all mixing up.
Yeah.
Okay. So you two will cross over in
Yep.
how many performances?
Only
What-
one.
Only one. Okay. So how does the room work? How is it all happening in the room with the
I mean,
with the
everything
different
is
casts?
organized in the best way. So everybody rehearsal, everybody has really enough space to
work,
yeah, and we are absolutely happy. with
Jonas
that.
is not here because, I don't know, is baby born already or not? Anybody knows?
Certainly due.
So we are waiting.
Yeah. And what is it like then being in a rehearsal room with someone else singing your part too? Is that an
But you know, actually, we never looking for the we never watching the rehearsals of other singers,
Right.
because you know, everybody is so personal.
Yeah.
And some things, for example, Jonas gonna do, of course, I will not repeat because I feel it differently, and of course he will do whatever he wants and how he wants. I mean, and that's absolutely, you know, that's normal, I think.
Yeah. There's going to be obviously a live cinema relay of the opera that people are going to be able to watch. For everybody here and watching and also coming to the Opera House, I'd love to know for each of you what the moment is in the opera that feels most powerful, most crucial to you, to your character, and also to you as a musician.
I cannot tell it now because I never sang this with the orchestra. I never sang this on the stage. We only did few rehearsals. I cannot answer yet. I guess probably it will get me into the shock when I will be on the stage with the orchestra. And then after that, when I will come down, I will tell you.
And actually, I'm very grateful to Maestro Pappano because he opened the cut and we're doing the duet with baritone one more,
Yeah.
which is really, I never saw it, I never listened to that music, but it's so beautiful, this huge duet, Ne gustare m'è dato, and really happy to do this duet in this opera, and I really love it. So this part for me, it's like a, maybe for the moment, it's this duet, you know, which is make me more, you know, like.
Just a word then about performing together as a couple. How is it for you making music together? I know you give lots of concerts.
We are
as a duo.
partners on the stage. We're working a lot together and our voices matching. And so we are.
As we said many, many times, we don't have to play love.
Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank
I know
you.
you're so busy, we're going to let you go.
Thank
but
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Anna
you.
Trebko. Thank you. Well, a little bit later on, we're going to be hearing more about Christoph Loy's new production and the history of the opera. But first, we are going to dive into the music itself, and I'm delighted to welcome music director of the Royal Opera, Maestro Antonio Pappano.
Good evening, everyone. La Forza del Destino, it's a long Russian novel, and they told me I only have a relatively short time to get into it. Very interesting. In its first version, one of the critiques of the piece was that it was too long. And the one thing that Verdi didn't change when he made the revision for La Scala was the length. He said that it was just an essential part of the structure of the piece, the timing of the piece, this unfolding of the drama. That said, the first act is one of his greatest creations because it's very, very compact and really jolts you. The end of the first act. The crux of the story is presented, and from there is born this long trajectory, this long voyage for each of the characters. Characters lost in their tragedies. One lost in his search for vengeance, and the other two lovers that actually never meet until the very end, as you heard our soloists talk about. So it's inherently has a very, very special melancholy, this piece. In the 1869 version, which we're performing, which is the revision that he made for La Scala, the overture was expanded, and it was turned into an overture that, in the traditional way, quoted several of the themes. And I'm going to play those for you because I think they're very, very important milestones along the way. I want you to keep in mind the idea of Beethoven throughout this little talk, because I think the ideas of Beethoven, I mean, we have of course, this, I mean, you won't hear that exactly, but you do hear. that 3-note figure going to the 4th note. It also becomes... This is Beethoven. You'll hear the similarities in a minute. But this knocking at the door, the knocking of destiny, if you like. The brass with the tang of this Spanish tang in the use of not the tuba but the chimbasso, very, very special, snarly bass trombone. And then now, that theme, here you hear it in a very, very subdued manner. And that theme you'll hear throughout the evening, always associated with Leonora. Leonora, after Act 1, when her elopement with Don Alvaro goes terribly wrong, her father is accidentally shot, and the two are separated. She is on the run. She's on the run from her brother who's seeking vengeance for this terrible act. And you can hear the music chasing you with this sighing figure. And over and over and over again. She has 3 arias, 2 of which have this as the introduction. The figure of Don Alvaro is something else. We meet him in Act 1, and he is a really dashing fellow. I mean, per sempre mio bell'angelo ne congiunge il cielo. Adesso, let's go. I'm ready. I'm going to take you away, and we're going to live life together. So he's really a dashing hero in that sense. He sings this beautiful theme, which will become very important for this little... So listen to this triplet. I'll explain why later. God will smile upon us and in our delight together. But we meet him in the overture in a very, very different guise. As I told you, they're separated, Leonora and Alvaro. And he goes off to war. There's all kinds of rumors of what happened to him. But later he joins a monastery. He gives up this life of struggle and of conflict. And you'll hear in this very, very sad theme, very well known because it's been used in the movies so often, but it has a melancholy yes. But it is also when he joins the monastery and he gives up this life of fighting, of his ardor, the ardor of his nature. So he's a South American Peruvian of Incan heritage. And in fact, that's why he's hated by Leonora's father. His father's a racist. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy, and in that way, very modern. But this melody is accompanied by, listen. It's like he can't escape this. But wait a minute, that's Leonora's theme. but that's about as close as they get to being really together, except in the first act. But there's a wonderful pathos in that music. Most of the utterances of Leonora are prayers. And this is very important to know, because here, in this prayer, she talks to God, and there's a nobility and an idealism in these beautiful arching phrases. But listen, somehow it's always poisoned by that destiny, that cruel destiny. As beautiful as this is, with its Catholic fervor, the tremolo, you hear those accents. There's real pain and humility before God. But and Verdi mixes these themes together so beautifully and so dramatically. The next prayer we have is where we hear a melody, which we will hear later in Act 2, when she ends up going to a monastery to ask to be hidden, taken in by this group. The Padre Guardiano is the head of this community, and there's a hermitage, there's a place where earlier another female came to be hidden for I don't know what reason, but she has got a recommendation from a Father Cleto, and this gets her into this place. And she meets this man, Padre Guardiano, and it's a very unusual duet, and it's one of the biggest structures that Verdi ever wrote. But it's between a bass and a soprano, so it's not her father, it's not her lover, it's not her brother, but it's a very strange world between the two of them that is joined by faith, or eventual faith. And she says, "Oh Lord, thank you for smiling upon the rejected one." And it's so beautiful. I'll play you just the melody, intoned by the clarinet. But these little diminuendos. Etc., etc. And this is accompanied by two harps. Cellos join in. Beautiful arching phrase there. And then we get, then we get more tension and more conflictual and theatrical music. But the melodies are extraordinary, pure. They're prayers. They're prayers. Now, the next prayer we have is now from the Padre Guardiano, from that same duet that I spoke about. All of this introduced in this overture. And he says, "O clement God, God of the poor, the Almighty." And his phrase is intoned, as you would imagine, by the brass, but in a very, very warm and paternal way. Then the dynamic changes. Then there's a crescendo. And we have then the Leonora's prayer that you heard before comes thundering out. And then always poisoned by this fate theme throughout. Big, flashy Italian ending to the overture, alla Rossini. He felt, because in the first version of this piece that he wrote for St. Petersburg, the overture is quite short. He felt he needed something that had real weight to make sense for the audience and to give them an idea of what they were about to hear. For me, one of the great dramaturgical ideas is how he gets into the first scene. Now you can imagine, father, daughter, and the maid are in the room. The daughter knows she's going to elope. She's waiting for her father to leave. We've heard those three fanfares, the very loud fanfares, this fate knocking at the door. Now we hear them in a guise, just a flute, very low in the register, and a low clarinet. And you could cut the tension in the room with a knife. You can imagine how nervous she is. Is Alvaro going to show up right now? Yeah. We hear in the bass something quite normal. But listen to these syncopations above. Then you'll feel the disquiet, the preoccupation of Leonora. Music is a little bit tetchy too. Stops and starts. And that adds to the tension. And in an aside, she says, "Oh, woe is me." This little miniature scene, I think, is just absolutely brilliant because it's so introverted, so totally the opposite of what the overture is. She starts to have second thoughts because her father is so paternal. She says, oh, she decides, well, she doesn't know what she wants, whether she wants to go, she wants to stay, and she can't make up her mind. In fact, she says, she sings an aria, a beautiful aria, with words, by the way, that were from the original libretto of King Lear that Verdi was supposed to write but never did. Now, whether the aria is a version of Cordelia's aria, a farewell to her father, or not, but the words are, she says, I'm going to be a pilgrim, an orphan, far away from the family nest. This fate, inexorable fate, is pushing me away to far-off lands. And beautifully scored it is, with a solo cello playing this arching, playing these beautiful arpeggios. This is the meek, me, the pilgrim, the orphan. Very vulnerable music. She starts to have visions of, and becomes insecure. In fact, she, she says goodbye to her country. The cello continues to weep. Aime, Aime. You hear how the orchestra and her overlap. Aime, Aime, non avran. I will always be suffering. Beautiful dissonance here. And then in a phrase very similar to Aida's, which he will write later. This is a prototype. Extraordinary phrase when she says, I will leave you my country, and you can just hear the O Patria Mia of the Act 3 of Aida, sort of born there. It's in embryonic form, but it's there already. She's such a wonderful character. I'm crazy about the character of Leonora, but she suffers so much. One of the criticisms of the piece was that there was too much interest in people that are not really part of the story. Well, Verdi very much wanted to highlight our main characters by showing a lot of other people, the normal world, the people who are not in this quandary, but who are around, who are, and there's a war going on, and we meet, you heard the first musical excerpt, we meet a character named Preziosilla, who is recruiting for the war, and she's really a hellraiser and a fantastic personality. And viva la guerra, viva la guerra, viva la guerra. So we get a lot of these kind of colorful scenes that have nothing really much to do with the story, but are opportunities to create light and shade. What I've played you mainly has been pretty shady, pretty dark. And so Verdi felt in a Shakespearean way that you needed contrast. So there's a lot of those kinds of scenes. Now, I haven't spoken much about the brother. In the original story, there are two brothers, but Verdi condensed it, and he's just tortured from the beginning to the end. And he has a spectacular aria where, believe it or not, he does meet Don Alvaro, but both of them are in disguise. So neither one recognizes the other. They have different names, the whole business. And the baritone, the brother, has become friends with the tenor, but there's something suspicious. But he's promised friendship to him. These are the typical baritonal colors, and perhaps the most conventional music in the piece. In the sense melodic, there's even bel canto, there's a cadenza where the singer shows his high note. The usual Verdian ending. But he gets a cabaletta. And a cabaletta, this late in Verdi's writing, becomes unusual. What is a cabaletta? Cabaletta, referring to the galloping of horses, cavallo, is a part of, usually a second part of an aria that has a galloping rhythm. And here he's found out now that this friend of his now is really Don Alvaro, and tan ta 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 tira tira ira ta ti ta ta ti ram illa ta 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 ti 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 So there's the fiery Spanish man that he is, we hear. And this is, like I said, it's quite unusual to have this kind of music so late in Verdi's output. I'll leave you with one last excerpt. And you remember at the beginning of my talk, I played to you this triplet theme, which Don Alvaro, when Alvaro expresses his love to Leonora. Well, in Act 3, before his aria, there's an extraordinary moment where we're at the encampment. We have the clarinet. And he's thinking of Leonora and he's thinking of Sevilla. Of course, the tremolo in the left hand, very important. We get a little bit more conventional Verdi here, like of Nabucco here. Sometimes the old tricks are the best. But it's an extraordinary clarinet solo. Listen to what happens here. And almost becoming like a Chopin nocturne, listen. Taking that triplet figure and ornamenting it. Bellini, Chopin. This is very Chopin. Why Chopin, I don't know. You could hear a Chopin ballade there. Beethoven again, like a piano concerto there. The cello again. Extraordinary to have this little concerto in the middle to create the atmosphere of loneliness and solitude and frustration and poetry and love and lost love, of course. The piece has so many other highlights. I mean, I could be here all night. I really could, but they're going to throw me out now. And so before they do that, I'm going to leave. Yeah, it's an extraordinary piece, and we have extraordinary singers to deliver this material. You can only do the piece if you have really, really great singers who have wonderful techniques and who really live Italian opera. The generosity of utterance that you must provide when you're in this music is extraordinary. So yeah, we're very lucky to be able to be doing this piece at all. But I hope to see you at one of the performances. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maestro Pappano. We could have listened to you all night. That was really absolutely fascinating, a wonderful insight into the music of Force of Destiny. Welcome to anyone, by the way, who's just joined us watching on our YouTube live stream. I know we have people all over the world watching in Brazil, Poland, Croatia, Spain and Mexico, and of course the live audience here at the Claw Studio at the Royal Opera House. Well, for the next part of this evening, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to my next guest, who is a lecturer in music at King's College London. She is Dr. Flora Wilson. So, Flora, I want to throw a completely wild question at you here, which is why Chopin? Having just listened to...
You know, I'd never thought about the Chopin thing before. I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous. It is exactly like that. As Pappano said, that is exactly what we're hearing there. I have no good answer for you on that, I'm afraid.
But it's a really fascinating score because not only with there Chopin and Beethoven in there, you can sort of hear bits of Schumann and Tchaikovsky. And is it a typical Verdi score that feels very like Verdi, or is it different to the other operas? In a way?
Now, it does feel like Verdi. It's also not typical Verdi. I think what's important about this is that this is an opera that he thought of as an opera of ideas, which was unusual for Verdi, and he thought it was a really serious opera that he'd produced, and he was very interested in experimenting stylistically. So this is an opera, as we've just heard, really, that's full of different kinds of musical languages, all jostling together and yet unified through that fate motif that just won't go away. And so I think it's an opera that could have only been produced by Verdi at this point in his career.
Which is where? So Aida is still to come, but he has already done...
We've had the middle period big hits. We've had Rigoletto, Trovatore, Traviata. He's got those under his belt. He's become, in short, an international star. And that means he's been travelling much more. He's got outside the Italian peninsula. And that's really had an effect. Not only has he become famous across the world, but his musical influences has sort of expanded, in particular the French influence, actually, which my guess is that's where Chopin comes into it, if it was indeed Chopin. He'd been to Paris, he'd been working in Paris by this point in the early 1860s, and that was really important for him in how he was thinking about writing for instruments, and in his whole sort of orchestral ambition, if you like, in what he was actually trying to do with an opera.
How did he come to be writing an opera for St. Petersburg?
Oh, well, what's remarkable, actually, is that he wrote this opera at all. So he wrote this opera after writing to various friends saying, I hope the muse has left me forever. I've had enough. I'm not going to write any more operas. I'm going to tend to my land now. And he'd basically retired to the country to be a landowner, a farmer, and also, in the wake of Italian unification in 1860, he'd been persuaded by Cavour, the first Italian prime minister, to actually take up a place in the first Italian national parliament. He really hadn't wanted to do this. He wanted to retire to the countryside, but he took that up, having been persuaded that he was going to have this really important symbolic presence there. And yet this commission came in at just the right moment. Giuseppina, who was his partner, had been his partner for 2 decades, but they'd recently got married. She fancied a winter in St. Petersburg, essentially. She got a bit bored in the countryside, poor woman. And Verdi had been spending a lot of money on doing up his country villa and thought that the 60,000 francs actually wouldn't go amiss to help to pay for any future work he needed to do on his land. And in the end, he therefore took up this commission, which was a real coup for St. Petersburg, for the Imperial Theatre, the Mariinsky there. But it was also exciting for Verdi. I mean, this was further than he'd yet been in Europe and was sort of important. Russian theatres had been staging Italian opera since the 18th century. It had been a really important, sort of prestigious art form in St. Petersburg. But this was a coup to get Verdi.
And why did he pick the subject that he did? Do we know if he'd had that on his mind for a while? Had it been...
Yeah, there's a good story here too, in that he actually wanted to write on a different subject. He wanted to set a Victor Hugo play, Ruy Blas, one of the great French romantic dramas. And the St. Petersburg authorities let it be known that this was not to their taste. They were concerned about censorship. There were some telegrams went backwards and forwards. And as a result, Verdi actually tried to pull out of the contract for a start, and this didn't go down well. The St. Petersburg Theatre sent someone to talk to him and say, look, we can accommodate you. What would you like to set, if not this? And he said, oh, well, there was this one play I did read this one time, and they're hanging on his words. And in the end, there's a sort of frantic search through Turin, where they're all based at that particular moment, to try and find what this play might have been. And eventually someone finds a copy in Milan, and it turns out to be a Spanish romantic drama, very much based on the Hugolian model, by Ángel Pérez de Saavedra. And that was Don Álvaro, the play, as you'd already mentioned, which is this sprawling romantic drama that clearly appealed to Verdi for its precisely this kind of dark, melodramatic nature, the fact that it is so varied, the fact that, as Tony Pappano says, you've got, on the other hand, lots of light and dark in there. There is as well as this huge sense of sort of fate driving the machinery of this thing, the sense of tragedy that runs through it. You've also got these lighter scenes with sort of Spanish folk people. And he supplemented those with bits of a play by Schiller, Wallenstein's Lager, Wallenstein's Camp, which actually supplies some of the military camp atmosphere, which is where Preziosilla, that's the feisty mezzo that we heard to start with, that's where she comes in, really. So we do have these different colours that play provides.
And although he wrote it for St. Petersburg, Maestro Pappano mentioned, of course, the La Scala revision. Tell us about this, because it's not a sort of clear-cut, he wrote the opera, that's it, it's in repertoire, and we all know the authentic score, as it were.
No, I mean, as so often in the 19th century, it's actually a bit of a mess. This is clearer cut than some in that there are essentially two versions of this opera. There is the one that he produced for St. Petersburg, which was premiered in St. Petersburg in 1862. Unfortunately, Verdi decided, having done that he felt it was just a bit too tragic. Tragedy is one thing, but an opera that ends with all three principals killing themselves or dying.
It's
all three.
All three of them at the end.
It really is curtains for all of them. The tenor hurls himself over the precipice, thus joining the baritone and the soprano. So he felt this was a bit much. But the problem was, and what occupied him for several years after that, trying to work out how to solve this dramaturgical problem, because he could see that's too dark. The problem was that from the very beginning of this opera, there is this sense, obviously, as the title suggests, of fate driving things. You can't suddenly have a neat, happy ending where the two families, despite the gun accident, that all is forgiven and it's fine and you can marry the couple off and hooray! That was never going to work. And so he had to solve this problem somehow. And what he ended up doing, and this is the biggest of the revisions that he made, essentially, is to change the ending of the opera so that Alvaro does end up surviving, that instead of him deciding he just can't live with himself and hurling himself over the precipice, there's a moment of sort of religious consolation, that the tragedy becomes somehow transcendent, that the father superior figure comes back on and is part of this final scene of the opera, and there's actually a moment of great consolation that he realizes he needs to live with this, but that's okay, he's going to end up with Leonora in the end in heaven. And that really changes the whole framing of the opera, if you like, in a different way.
Did Verdi actually go to St. Petersburg at the end? Did Giuseppina get her
They did.
Get her holiday?
Remarkably, Giuseppina got 2 trips to St. Petersburg. It was a sort of bog-off situation, buy one, get one free. Because unfortunately, the first attempt didn't work out for Verdi. So Verdi finished the opera in November 1861. They set off to St. Petersburg via Paris, when they needed to pick up a special winter suit that Verdi had made. Giuseppina, meanwhile, had spent the previous months getting all her clothes modified with bits of fur added everywhere and linings. They were very worried about the cold. They talked about the eternal ice creams of St. Petersburg. So they'd done all this. They set off, they went via Paris, they ended up in St. Petersburg. Within a month or so, it had become very clear to Verdi that the singers were not capable of singing his opera, unfortunately. And in particular, the Leonora was just not going to work. The voice was too fragile, as he put it, quite unusually kindly, in fact, for Verdi, who could be very cruel about singers when he was writing letters. He tried to pull out the contract again. St. Petersburg again refused to allow that to happen. He was really sort of, he was an important figure for them to have got. But Verdi accepted, the St. Petersburg Theatre authorities accepted, it was going to have to be a delay. There was no way the premiere could go ahead. So Giuseppina and Verdi set off back to Italy via Paris and London in this particular case. They took in the exhibition, the international exhibition that was happening in London in the summer in 1862. They were here for that. And then later in the year, they went back to St. Petersburg again, and the opera was finally premiered in November, and the Tsar turned up. The Tsar actually received Verdi in his box. It was the fourth performance, because the Tsar had been ill until then, unfortunately, and unable to attend. But he turned up for the fourth performance and actually personally said thanks to Verdi, and eventually, before heading off on his winter trip to Moscow, I think, awarded Verdi a particular honor of the Russian state. So Verdi went down very, very well. After that, Verdi went off to Madrid for the Madrid premiere of the opera, and that's the point at which he knew he wasn't happy with it, so he carried on tinkering. Eventually, he had ended up, he worked out a solution. Unfortunately, Piave, who was his librettist for the original version of the opera, he'd had a dreadful stroke in 1867 and was actually paralyzed, would be for the rest of his life, and so was unable to work with Verdi on the opera again. So this is where Verdi got Gisanzoni involved, who would end up writing the libretto for Aida. So these operas are all tangled up very closely together, and between them, they got the opera to Milan in 1869.
Fantastic. And so the story continues. Look, we have to leave it there, Flora. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking Dr. Flora Wilson.
Thanks.
So, for the final part of this insight evening into Verdi's La Forza del Destino, I'm delighted to welcome the Associate Director of this new production, Georg Zlabinger. So, Georg, you're working incredibly closely with the director, Christoph Loy. It's a very strong working partnership. When did you two first start working together?
My hometown is Vienna, and I started there as staff director at Theater Wien, which was is still one of the closest artistic partners for Christoph in the last 10 years. And that's where we met as well in 2015 for his production of Peter Grimes, which was then awarded with the International Opera Award for Best Production, so that was a quite good start, actually.
And you're working with Euryanthe there.
Exactly,
right? Yeah.
so that was the last show we did together. And then we just, we had several productions together in Theater Wien, but also I accompanied him abroad.
Yeah.
And also Amsterdam for Forza.
So this particular production is a co-production with Dutch National Opera, so it's already been performed in Amsterdam. What's actually involved, and we've got some pictures up actually of that production, which we'll come to in a moment, but what's actually involved in transferring a production? It's new here, but it's still already happened in a completely different theatre. What do you actually practically have to do to move it?
It's a lot, because we have different singers, we have two casts here, as we heard. We had to change the whole setting kind of by trying to keep the ground idea and the aesthetics, of course, but because of the reduced size possibilities here, we had to also reduce the size of the set so
it's a smaller stage.
So it's a smaller stage, exactly. Yes, it's less wide, and so of course we have to adapt certain things staging-wise, spacing-wise, but also, of course, we have, in the context of the concept, we have to find adaptations or reinterpretations for each and every one singing, because, of course, all of these singers bring their own individuality, their own personality, and their own individual approach to the character. So, of course, it's really important to try to find a compromise without losing the bigger picture. Yeah.
So, I mean, you say within the concept of the production.
Exactly.
Let's talk about that.
Yes.
What is the concept of this particular production?
I
How
try
is
to make
Christoph
it
Loy?
very short, or to maybe to pick out two main themes that are really important for the piece and for the concept. So fate, destiny, and religion, which were also already exposed in the overture so good by Maestro Pappano. So destiny, of course, we see that already in the title. So we see this overnatural force kind of influencing and changing everyday's lives or personal life stories. But that's the one thing we have to understand or to analyze, but it's also important, and that's important for the concept, to try to understand the way of dealing of everybody with this bigger complex destiny, or with also the effects that it has, and to kind of analyze the idea and concerns everybody has about destiny, to find out the personal and individual perspective on that theme, involving questions like is there a separation line between pure coincidence and destiny? What makes a moment worth calling a fatal moment? What is the most interesting thing actually? Is destiny more or less a construct or an idea to justify and explaining bad things happening? So that's also a question we have to ask, and that links to the second big theme, religion, which is so omnipresent here, of course, in the sense of Catholic Christianity. There's so many situations, especially with Leonora, where we see people praying and calling God and the Holy Virgin for help and for support. So we feel a deep, profound desire for spirituality on the one hand, and to kind of understand a bigger coherence, and to also find a way of, or a means of dealing with this negativity of life. So this is, yeah.
And are these discussions which are happening in the rehearsal rooms?
Of course, yes, of course. So that's, and everybody has his own opinion about these things, but I think it's my job to ask these general questions, or to give them a start, and then we can build the character around it.
And do you give the singers any kind of preparation when you're working with a new cast on this?
Beforehand,
beforehand, do you send them lists of questions like, do you think fate
really.
is a construct?
No, not really. Not in that case. No, it didn't work like this. It's really about meeting in the rehearsal room, and then creating the best solution for everybody. Yes.
And in terms of the setting, I mean, we're seeing a few pictures here. What's the sort of general kind of place, time in which Christoph Loy has set this with the designer Christian Schmidt? I mean, is it a specific moment in time, or is it left slightly more general and open?
It's a little bit more abstract, I would say. It's so the story is basically set in Spain and in Italy, and this war, which happens in the third act, gives us kind of the time coordinates. It's the succession war between Austria and Italy in 1744. And Christoph decided to forget about that a little bit, and to bring it a little bit closer to the present, and to kind of create a poetical vision of the first half of the 20th century, to kind of create a metaphorical background or associative framework where we have all these motives and themes traded, linking, of course, to the biggest wars in European history, linking to a time where we see like the greatest cultural and social changes, where we see a big fragility in society, where we also see a rise of racism and exclusion and all these things, which are very important in the piece as well.
Because in a way, of the hundreds of operas in the repertoire, it's one that does lend itself to a slightly more abstract setting. It's
Yeah.
not so kind of socially and time specific that it
Yeah.
has to be set
Yeah.
in that one
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
In the way that something like, for example, Traviata
Yeah.
is really of its moment
Yeah.
Paris society at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah.
One of the kind of really tricky things I think for everybody about Forza is the fact that it has such a long time span within it. Not
Yeah.
just that it's a long opera,
Yeah.
but that we meet the characters over time.
Yeah.
How have you dealt with that in the production?
To concretize or clarify this, so that the time in the libretto is about 5 years. That's also the time covered in the play by Duque de Rivas. And Christoph decided to extend that time so that we really see a life journey of everybody from childhood on to a higher age, which gives the possibility to understand or to also analyze the roots of conflicts, of traumas already in the childhood for every of these three protagonists, to understand the profoundness and the profoundness of suffers they have to go through their whole life. And of course we realize that by we see that in the set, in the changing set, we see that in the costumes and in the makeup, but it's also about trying to create this psychological and emotional journey as well, of course, for each and every one during the rehearsals. So,
looking at the picture that's
Yes.
up there at the moment, I'm really interested also in the stylistic mix that exists
Yeah.
in this opera, because you know, we heard Yusuf and Anna talking about how desperately sad and depressing it is, but of course there are also these wild, almost buffa scenes in it. So is it a production which sort of takes off in lots of different directions in a way, because the opera invites that?
kind of, but by having mentioned these two themes, destiny and religion, that's kind of the link between these, of course, these personal life stories, but also these big mass scenes, which was also important to Christoph, that we don't show a side by side, or just, of course, it's a light and shadow, and that's good like this, but also to find the link between these two dimensions, so that we don't only see those things or existing side by side, you know, and to ask the same questions about destiny, about religion, about the life concepts of people in the personal stories, but also in the mass scenes, in the chorus scenes, that are really, a lot in this piece.
Is there much fun in the rehearsal room?
Yeah.
Given the relentless tragic fate that seems to
Yeah,
run
it
through
is
everything?
actually, especially with the chorus, because we have up to 100 people on stage, and that's basically for half of the time of the opera. So it's really about having scenes, party scenes, and party scenes with much choreography in them, and really sparkling and exciting and entertaining situations. So of course that is connected with fun, even if it's a big effort to lead hundreds of people, of course.
And there's one other really striking element, just looking at the images, which is the projection.
Yes.
What's the kind of part that projection plays? The lighting designer is Olaf Winter.
Olaf Winter, yes. It's we heard about that moment, this fatal moment when Don Alvaro drops the gun and accidentally it goes off and kills the father, and then he dies, and by dying he curses his daughter, and of course this influences and has this horrible impact on the whole story happening afterwards. But it happens so fast, and it's such a short moment actually. So at the one hand, of course, practically to avoid that anybody misses it, but also to underline this fatal significance of that moment, Christoph decided to bring it on a video that is projected on the back wall, where we already see the whole scene linking to the accident in slow motion, and then we also see the shot again, and then during the opera, at certain points, when every time when Leonora remembers or has this memory of that horrible night, it comes back like a nightmare or like a horror vision in her fantasy. Yeah.
So, final question, what's been the sort of most striking thing for you working on this piece? What's really sort of landed with you in this? Because it's obviously been quite a journey.
Yeah. I think, of course, these unfortunate destinies to witness this. Of course, it's a huge thing that you have to process, but also the huge dimension. Also just like for my work, these huge dimensions of the piece, and to bring together all these stories and try to find to get an arch for this big and long story, for these several storylines that somehow have to go together. I think that's one of the most striking things.
It's a piece that gets under your skin, isn't it?
Yes, totally. Yes.
Georg, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sadly, that is all we have time for, but you can catch La Forza del Destino in a cinema near you on the 2nd of April, or live on stage from the 21st of March. Thank you so much to everybody here in the Claw studio at the Royal Opera House for being here. Also to everybody watching across the world on our YouTube channel. Please join me now in thanking all of tonight's guests.